Teenager went missing in 2003. 12 years later, teacher reads an untouched diary and realizes the dust wasn't the first thing he noticed, it was the smell. A dead, flat smell, like old paper and forgotten things, but with a sickly sweet undertone that clung to the back of his throat. Mr. Harrison, a man whose life had been a carefully curated collection of predictable moments, felt a tremor of something alien ripple through him. He stood in the doorway of the attic, a single bare bulb casting long, dancing shadows that made the familiar shapes of stacked boxes and shrouded furniture seem monstrous. He was only up here because of the leak. A dark, ugly stain had appeared on the ceiling of the guest bedroom, a room that hadn't seen a guest in years. The source, he'd deduced with the resigned sigh of a homeowner, must be the roof. And the attic was the only way to it. He pulled the string for a second, brighter light, and the attic sprang into a less menacing, more pathetic reality. It was a graveyard of his life, with Eleanor, his late wife. Her wedding dress, yellowing in its plastic shroud. Boxes of photo albums he couldn't bring himself to open. And over in the corner, tucked under the slope of the roof, was the small, forgotten desk. It had been their daughter's, Lily's. His breath hitched. He hadn't thought about Lily's desk in how long, a decade more. After she disappeared, the police had taken everything from her room. Everything they thought was evidence. But the desk, a heavy oak thing they'd bought at a flea market and sanded down together, had been deemed irrelevant. It had been moved. Up here, along with the rest of the painful ghosts, and forgotten. Until now. A fine layer of grey dust, as smooth and undisturbed as a fresh snowfall, coated its surface. But it wasn't completely undisturbed. Right in the center, something was different. A small, perfect square, darker than the surrounding dust. As if something had been resting there for a long, long time, and had only recently been moved. His eyes followed a faint trail in the dust, leading from the square to the edge of the desk, and then down. He knelt, his knees cracking in protest. Underneath the desk, pushed back against the wall, was a small leather-bound book. It wasn't the dust or the smell that held him captive. It was the silence. The profound, suffocating silence of 12 years of unanswered questions. 12 years of waking up with the scream still lodged in his throat. 12 years since Lily, his bright, fierce, 17-year-old daughter, had walked out the door to go to the library and never came back. His hand trembled as he reached for the book. The leather was cool and supple, the kind of journal a teenage girl would choose to hold her most sacred secrets. On the front, embossed in faded gold leaf, were 2 letters, L.H., Lily Harrison. A wave of nausea rolled over him. He'd never seen it before. The police had searched her room, her locker, her friends' houses. They'd interviewed everyone. How could they have missed this? How could he have missed this? He sank to the dusty floorboards, the book feeling impossibly heavy. In his hands. He shouldn't open it. It was a violation, a sacrilege. Lily was gone. Her secrets were her own. But the square and the dust. It meant someone had been up here recently. Someone had moved this diary. The thought sent a jolt of ice through his veins. The leak in the roof suddenly felt insignificant. A mundane problem from a world he no longer inhabited. This book, this dusty, forgotten object, was the only thing that felt real. It was a piece of her he never knew he had. With a shaking thumb, he pried it open. The first page was a scrawl of lyrics from some band he didn't recognize. The second page was a drawing of a bird with a broken wing. And then, on the third page, the handwriting he knew as well as his own, but different. Older, sharper, angrier. September 3, 2003. He did it again. He cornered me by the lockers, right after history. The whole hall was full of people, but it was like they were all invisible. Or maybe I was. He has this way of looking at you, like he's peeling back your skin with his eyes, and he knows you won't scream. He knows you won't do anything. He just smiled, that perfect, white Colgate smile, and whispered, "You're running out of time, little bird." Mr. Harrison's heart hammered against his ribs. Who was he? He read on, his eyes flying across the page, a cold dread coiling. In his stomach, the diary wasn't just a collection of teenage angst, it was a chronicle of fear. A detailed, terrifying account of being stalked, harassed, and threatened by someone Lily never named. She only ever called him the king. The king thinks he owns this town. He thinks he owns everyone in it. My dad sees him at the club, all handshakes and back. He doesn't see the way his eyes linger on me. He doesn't hear the things he says when no one else is around. Such a pretty thing, a shame to break it. That's what he said to me at the Founders' Day picnic, right in front of my own father, and my dad just laughed, thinking it was a joke. A memory, sharp and unwelcome, pierced through the fog of time. The Founders' Day picnic. He remembered that day. He'd been talking to Marcus Thorne, the town's golden boy, the real estate mogul who had single-handedly revitalized their dying downtown. Marcus, with his charismatic smile and his seemingly endless generosity. Marcus, who had put a hand on Lily's shoulder and said something that made her flinch. He'd thought nothing of it. A clumsy compliment from a powerful man. But now, reading Lily's words, the memory soured, twisted into something grotesque. He flipped through the pages, a desperate, frantic search. The entries grew more erratic, more panicked. There were descriptions of his car, a sleek black Mercedes, parked outside their house late at night. Notes left on her windshield, the feeling of being watched, constantly. And then, the last entry, dated October 17, 2003. The day she disappeared. He knows, I know. I saw him. I saw what he did to her. I wasn't supposed to be there. I was cutting through the woods behind the old mill, and I saw his car. I heard a scream. I hid. I saw him drag her out of the trunk. She wasn't moving. He put her in the boat, and he took her out to the middle of the lake. He was alone. I know he was. I have to tell someone. I have to, but who would believe me? He's the king. He owns the police. He owns the judges. He owns this whole rotten town. He told me I was next. He said if I ever told anyone what I saw, he'd make me disappear. I'm going to the library. I'm going to leave this in my history book. The one about the Salem witches. Maybe someday, someone will find it. Someone will understand. My name is Lily Harrison. And I'm afraid Mr. Harrison stared at the page, the words blurring through a sudden, hot film of tears. It wasn't a confession. It was a testimony. A message in a bottle from a shipwreck he never even knew had happened. Lily hadn't run away. She hadn't had a breakdown. She had been a witness. A witness to a murder. And the man who had stalked her, tormented her, and ultimately silenced her, was Marcus Thorne. The man he had admired. The man he had trusted. The man who still lived just 3 houses down, in a sprawling mansion overlooking the very lake where he had disposed of his secrets. The attic felt like a tomb, the air thick and unbreathable. The silence was no longer empty, it was screaming. It was the scream Lily had tried to suppress, the scream she had poured into these pages. The leak in the roof, the dust, the forgotten furniture, it all faded away. There was only the diary, a testament to his daughter's courage and his own devastating blindness. The square in the dust, someone had been here. Someone knew about this diary. Was it Thorne? Had he come back to destroy the last piece of evidence? Or was it someone else? The question hung in the air, a terrifying, unanswered echo of Lily's final words. He had to know. For Lily, he had to know. The man who had spent 12 years drowning in grief suddenly felt a different emotion. Something sharp and cold and dangerous. Rage. And for the first time since his daughter vanished, he knew what he had to do. The king had to fall. He clutched the diary to his chest, its worn leather a fragile shield against the storm of emotions that threatened to tear him apart. Lily, his brave, terrified Lily. He could see her so clearly, not as the smiling girl in the framed photos downstairs, but as the hunted animal described in these pages. He remembered her in the months before she vanished. The withdrawn silences, the dark circles under her eyes, he'd dismissed as teenage melodrama. The sudden, inexplicable drops in her grades. She'd been a strata student, a firecracker. with a razor-sharp wit and a passion for justice that often got her into trouble. He'd been so proud of her fire. And then, the fire had just gone out. He'd thought it was a boy, or a fight with her best friend, Sarah. He'd tried to talk to her, but she'd built a wall around herself, a fortress he couldn't breach. Now he knew what that wall was made of. It was made of terror. The memory of Sarah pricked at him. Sarah Jenkins. She had been inseparable from Lily since kindergarten. A quiet, mousy girl who had always lived in Lily's vibrant shadow. After Lily disappeared, Sarah had been shattered. She'd barely spoken to anyone for months. The police had questioned her, of course, over and over again, but she'd known nothing. Or so she had said. He remembered her sitting in their living room, her face pale and tear-streaked, twisting a loose thread on her sweater. "I don't know, Mr. Harrison. She just seemed sad. She wouldn't tell me why." Had that been the truth? Or had she been protecting Lily, or herself? And then there was Marcus Thorne, the king. He was more than just a real estate mogul. He was the town's benefactor, its patriarch. He'd funded the new library, the one Lily was supposedly walking to on that final afternoon. He'd sponsored the high school football team, paid for new equipment, new uniforms. He was on the board of every major charity. His face beamed from local news articles, shaking hands with the mayor, the police chief. Untouchable. That was the word Lily had used, and it was true. To accuse Marcus Thorne of anything, let alone murder, would be career suicide. Social suicide. It would be an act of madness. But Lily's words were a deathbed confession. "I saw what he did to her." Who was her? Another missing girl. He scanned the diary again, his fingers fumbling with the pages. There were no other names, just her. A ghost haunting the edges of his daughter's nightmare. He had to think. The police had been useless 12 years ago. The investigation, led by Chief Brody, a man who played golf with Thorne every Saturday, had been closed after 6 months. A troubled teen runaway. That was the official narrative. They'd pointed to her changing behavior, her grades, the way she'd pushed everyone away. They'd painted a picture of a girl who couldn't handle the pressure, who had simply cracked and walked away from her life. It was a convenient story. It required no real work, no uncomfortable questions aimed at the town's most powerful man. It had allowed everyone, including himself, to retreat into a numb, grief-stricken acceptance. But the diary burned that narrative to ash. The square in the dust. The book had been moved. Someone had come looking for it. What if Thorne had found out about its existence? What if he was trying to clean up loose ends after all these years? The thought made his blood run cold. But if Thorne had found it, why not take it? Why leave it here for him to discover? It didn't make sense. Unless it wasn't Thorne who had moved it. Unless it was someone else, someone who wanted it to be found. He forced himself to his feet, his joints screaming in protest. The attic was no longer a safe haven of memories. It was a crime scene. He had to get out of there, had to get the diary somewhere safe. He tucked it inside his jacket, the small book, a cold weight against his heart. As he descended the rickety attic ladder, his mind raced. He couldn't go to Chief Brody. That was a death sentence. He needed proof. Hard, irrefutable proof that would tear down the walls of plausible deniability that Marcus Thorne had built around himself. Lily's diary was a start. It was her voice, her testimony. But it was the word of a dead girl against a living God. It wouldn't be enough. He needed more. He needed to find out who her was. He needed to find the body. And he needed to find the person who had moved the diary. Back in the sterile quiet of his study, he laid the diary on his desk. The embossed letters catching the light from his desk lamp, LH. It was a brand, a mark of ownership. But it was also a cry for help. He thought about the people in Lily's life, the small constellation of friends and teachers who had known her. Who among them could have been the silent witness, the keeper of this secret? His thoughts returned to Sarah Jenkins. The quiet girl, the shadow. After high school, she'd left town for a few years, But she'd returned. She was a teacher now. At the same high school she and Lily had attended. An English teacher. He'd seen her a few times at the grocery store. A sad, haunted look always in her eyes. She'd always been polite, always asked how he was doing. But there was a distance there, a chasm of unspoken words. He remembered a conversation with her. A few months after Lily disappeared, he'd been desperate, grasping at straws. He'd asked her if Lily had a secret boyfriend, if she'd been involved in something she was hiding. Sarah had looked down at her hands, her voice barely a whisper. Lily had secrets, Mr. Harrison, but they weren't hers to tell. At the time, he'd thought she meant some trivial high school drama. Now, the words had a chilling, ominous ring. They weren't hers to tell, because they were about Marcus Thorne, about a murder. And what about the antagonist himself? Marcus Thorne, he was a man defined by his image, a carefully constructed facade of charm, wealth, and civic duty. He lived in a glass house on the lake, a monument to modern architecture and transparent ambition. But Lily's diary painted a different picture. A portrait of a predator, a man who collected beautiful things and broke them for sport. He thought about Thorne's wife, a fragile, bird-like woman who rarely appeared in public. Her face, always obscured by large sunglasses, were there other victims? Other girls who had been broken. The diary mentioned a boat. The police had searched Thorne's boat back in 2003. A cursory, respectful inspection that had turned up nothing. But what if they hadn't known what to look for? The clock on the mantelpiece chimed, each note a hammer blow against the silence. It was 10 o'clock. 12 years of grief had aged him, hollowed him out, turned him into a ghost in his own home, but Lily's diary had breathed a new, terrible purpose into him. He was no longer just a grieving father. He was an avenger. He had to be careful. He had to be smart. Thorne was powerful, protected. A single misstep, and the diary would disappear, and he would be dismissed as a crazy old man, driven mad by loss. He had to unravel this conspiracy from the inside out. And his first thread, the one he had to pull, was Sarah Jenkins. She had been Lily's confessor, her shadow. She had lived with this secret, this poison, for 12 years. The haunted look in her eyes was not just grief, it was fear and guilt. He looked at the phone, his hand hovering over the receiver. He wouldn't call, not yet. A phone call could be traced, a conversation overheard. No, he would have to see her in person. He would have to go to the one place he had avoided for over a decade. He would have to go back to Northwood High. The next morning, the world seemed unnervingly normal. The sun shone, birds sang, neighbors waved as they collected their morning papers. It was a world that had forgotten Lily Harrison. A world that had allowed her killer to walk free, to become a pillar of the community. The hypocrisy of it all was a physical ache in his chest. He drove to the high school, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, the diary tucked safely in his briefcase. The building was just as he remembered it. A sprawling brick edifice of teenage hopes and anxieties. As he walked through the main doors, the smell of floor wax and adolescent sweat hit him, a nostalgic punch to the gut. He saw ghosts in every hallway. Lily, laughing with her friends by the lockers. Lily, arguing a point in debate club. Lily, sitting alone in the cafeteria, her face a mask of worry. He found Sarah's classroom at the end of a long sunlit corridor. The door was open. She was at her desk, marking papers, a pair of reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked older, of course, but the same quiet intensity was there. The same sense of a person holding themselves tightly together. He knocked softly on the doorframe. She looked up, her eyes widening in surprise, and for a fleeting moment, something else flickered across her face, fear, pure, undiluted fear. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice a little shaky. She stood up, smoothing down her skirt, a nervous, reflexive gesture. What are you doing here?" "Hello, Sarah," he said, his own voice sounding strange and distant to his ears. "I was hoping I could talk to you for a moment about Lily." The name hung in the air between them, a ghost summoned into the bright, cheerful classroom. The color drained from Sarah's face. She glanced nervously down the empty hallway, as if expecting to see someone listening. "Now's not a good time, Mr. Harrison. I have a class in 5 minutes." "It'll only take a moment," he insisted, stepping into the room. He closed the door behind him, the soft click echoing in the sudden, tense silence. "I found something of Lily's." He opened his briefcase and took out the diary. He didn't hand it to her. He just held it, letting her see the faded gold initials. Sarah stared at the book, her breath catching in a small, sharp gasp. Her carefully constructed composure crumbled, her face contorting with a grief so raw, so fresh, it was as if Lily had disappeared only yesterday. Double quotes. "Where did you get that?" she whispered, her eyes locked on the diary. "In my attic," he said, his voice low and steady. "It was hidden. It seems someone moved it recently. I thought, perhaps, you might know something about that." Sarah shook her head, a frantic, jerky movement. "No, why? I've never seen that before." "Are you sure, Sarah?" he pressed, his gaze unwavering. "Because Lily wrote about you in here. She wrote about a lot of things she was afraid to say out loud. Secrets she trusted you with." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her pale cheeks. "Please, Mr. Harrison, you have to understand, I was just a kid. I was scared." "Scared of what, Sarah?" he asked, his voice softening slightly. "Scared of him. Scared of Marcus Thorne." The name was a gunshot in the quiet room. Sarah flinched violently, a choked sob escaping her lips. She sank back into her chair, her hands flying to her mouth. "Don't say his name," she pleaded, her voice muffled by her fingers. "Not here. He has eyes and ears everywhere." "I know," he said, the confirmation sending a fresh wave of cold dread through him. "Lily wrote about it. She wrote about everything. The stalking, the threats. She wrote about the old mill, Sarah. She wrote about seeing him with another girl." Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. "She wrote that down. Oh God, I told her not to. I begged her to just forget it, to let it go." "So you knew," he said, the pieces clicking into place. "She told you what she saw." Sarah nodded, her body racked with silent sobs. "She came to my house that night. She was hysterical. She said she'd seen him with Jennifer Croft. You remember Jennifer? She was a year ahead of us. She dropped out a few weeks before Lily, before she went away. Everyone said she'd run off to California with some guy she met. But Lily saw them. Thorne and Jennifer. He was hurting her, Mr. Harrison he was. And then he put her in his boat. Lily was so scared she didn't know what to do. She thought, if she told someone, he would come for her next. Jennifer Croft. The name was vaguely familiar. A pretty popular girl who had vanished from the school's radar without a trace. Another convenient story. Another life erased. "Why didn't you go to the police, Sarah?" he asked, the question tasting like ashes in his mouth. "The police," she said, a bitter, hysterical laugh bubbling up. "Chief Brody's son was in my class. He used to brag about all the perks his dad got from Mr. Thorne. Free weekends at his cabin. Courtside tickets, things like that. Who were we supposed to tell? We were just kids. He is, a monster. A monster everyone thinks is a saint." The bell shrieked in the hallway, a harsh, intrusive sound. Students began to clatter past the door, their laughter and chatter a world away from the suffocating tension in the room. Sarah jumped, wiping frantically at her tears. "You have to go," she said, her voice urgent. "He can't know you were here. He can't know you have that." "Who moved the diary, Sarah?" he asked, his voice low and insistent. "Was it you?" She hesitated, her eyes darting towards the door. She looked at him, her gaze filled with a desperate, pleading intensity. "I can't, not here. Meet me tonight, 8 o'clock. The old diner on Route 9. Don't bring the diary, just come alone, please, it's not safe." She was right. The school, a place of learning and innocence, was tainted. It was part of his web. He nodded, his heart pounding. "I'll be there." He turned and left, melting into the throng of students, his mind reeling. Jennifer Croft, another victim, another family left with questions and a hole in their lives. The conspiracy was real. The cover-up was real. And Sarah, the quiet, fearful girl, was the key. She had been living with this truth, this poison, for 12 long years. The weight of it had crushed her, turning her into a ghost of her former self. But now, the diary had forced her hand. The question was, would she finally find the courage to speak? Or would Thorne's shadow, long and dark, silence her for good? The diner on Route 9, a neutral ground, away from the prying eyes of the town. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that nowhere was truly safe. The king's reign was absolute, and he had just declared war. The drive to the diner was a journey through a landscape of ghosts. Every landmark was tainted by a memory of Lily, the park where he'd taught her to ride a bike, the ice cream shop she'd loved, the movie theater where she'd had her first date. He saw her everywhere, a shimmering phantom of what he had lost. But now, the grief was sharpened by a new, terrible clarity. He wasn't just mourning her absence. He was mourning the life that had been stolen from her, the brutal, violent end she had met at the hands of a man he had once called a friend. The diner was a relic from another era, a long silver tube of neon and chrome squatting by the side of the highway. Its parking lot was mostly empty. He chose a booth in the far back, one that gave him a clear view of the entrance. He ordered a black coffee he didn't want, the hot mug a small point of warmth in his cold hands. He was early, he wanted to be, he needed time to think, to prepare. What would he say to Sarah? How could he convince her to trust him, to stand with him against Thorne? Her fear was palpable, a living thing that had shaped her entire adult life. He couldn't blame her. She was a teacher. She had a life, a career. Testifying against Marcus Thorne would destroy it all. The minutes ticked by, each one stretching into an eternity. 8 o'clock came and went. Then 8:15. A sick feeling began to pool in his stomach. She wasn't coming. Thorne had gotten to her. Or her own fear had paralyzed her. He was about to leave when the diner door swung open, and a figure stood silhouetted against the dark parking lot. It wasn't Sarah. It was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark baseball cap pulled low over his face. He scanned the diner, his gaze lingering for a moment on Mr. Harrison's booth before he turned and walked to the counter. He ordered a coffee to go, his back to the room. But something about his posture, the tense set of his shoulders, put Mr. Harrison on edge. Paid for his coffee, and left. The man at the counter, never turning around. Mr. Harrison watched him get into a dark-colored SUV and drive away, heading back towards town. Coincidence? Or a warning? He didn't know. But Sarah was still a no-show. At 9 o'clock, he finally accepted it. She wasn't coming. He paid his bill and walked out into the cool night air, the feeling of dread now a certainty. Something was wrong. He drove straight to her house, a small, neat cottage on a quiet side street. The lights were on. Her car was in the driveway. He walked up to the front door and knocked. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time, his anxiety mounting. "Sarah, it's David Harrison. Are you in there?" Silence. He tried the doorknob. It was unlocked. A fresh wave of alarm washed over him. Sarah was not the kind of person to leave her door unlocked. He pushed it open a few inches. Sarah, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The living room was tidy, a book lying open on the sofa as if she'd just set it down. A half-empty mug of tea sat on the coffee table beside it. Everything looked normal, but the silence was screaming. He walked through the small house, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The kitchen, the bedroom, the bathroom, everything was in its place, but there was no sign of Sarah. He was about to leave, to call the police. Gesture, he knew, but what else could he do? When he noticed it, on the small desk in the corner of her bedroom, next to her laptop, was a single sheet of paper. It was a printout of an email. The sender was an anonymous, encrypted address, but the message was terrifyingly clear. "I know you spoke to him. I know what you're planning. Think about Lily. Think about what happened to her. Do you want to end? Up in the lake too, some secrets are meant to be kept. Stay quiet, or you'll be silenced. Underneath the typed message, a single handwritten word was scrawled in a shaky, almost illegible hand. A pen lay on the floor beside the desk, as if it had been dropped in a hurry. The word was basement. His blood ran cold. The house had a basement. The door was in the kitchen. A small, unassuming door he hadn't even noticed. He ran to it, his hand fumbling for the knob. It was locked. He threw his shoulder against it, once, twice, the wood groaning. In protest. On the third try, the lock splintered, and the door flew open, revealing a set of steep, dark stairs leading down into blackness. A damp, musty smell wafted up, the smell of earth and decay. "Sarah," he called out, his voice hoarse. A faint sound answered him, a soft, whimpering moan. He fumbled for the light switch, his fingers finding it just inside the doorframe. He flicked it on. Nothing happened. The bulb was out, or the wire had been cut. He pulled out his phone, its small screen casting a weak, flickering light down the stairs. He descended cautiously, each step creaking under his weight. The air grew colder, heavier. The whimpering sound grew louder. And then he saw her. She was huddled in the far corner of the small, damp cellar, her arms wrapped around her knees. Her face was bruised, her lips split and bleeding. Her eyes were wide with a terror so profound it seemed to have erased her entirely. She was shaking uncontrollably. "Sarah," he whispered, rushing to her side. "My God, what happened? Who did this to you?" She flinched at his touch, a small animal sound of fear escaping her lips. "He was here," she whispered, her voice a raw, broken thing. "He was waiting for me," he said. "He said he knew. He knew about the diary. He said if I talked, he would kill me. He said he would do to me what he did to Jennifer." "Thorn?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. She nodded, a fresh wave of sobs shaking her small frame. "It wasn't him. It was the man who works for him. The one who does his dirty work. The man in the SUV at the diner. He was following you. He followed me home. He wanted the diary. I told him I didn't have it. He didn't believe me. He tore my house apart, and then she couldn't finish, her words dissolving into ragged gasps. He helped her to her feet, her body limp and trembling against his. He had to get her out of there, get her somewhere safe. But where was safe? Thorn's reach was everywhere. The email, the man at the diner, the brutal attack on Sarit was a clear, unambiguous message. He was escalating. He was no longer content to let the past lie buried. He was actively hunting for the diary, ready to eliminate anyone who stood in his way, as he helped Sarah up the stairs and into the relative brightness of the kitchen. His eyes fell on her laptop, still open on the desk in her bedroom. The email was a dead end, sent from an untraceable account. But what if there was something else? What if Sarah, in her fear, had been trying to fight back in her own quiet way? He gently sat her down on a kitchen chair, wrapping a blanket around her shaking shoulders. "Sarah," he said, his voice calm and steady, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside him. "I need you to think. Did you back up your files? Is there anything on your computer, any research you did, anything about Thorn or Jennifer Croft, that he might have missed?" She looked at him, her eyes still glazed with shock, but a flicker of understanding sparked within them. She nodded slowly. "A thumb drive," she whispered. I kept everything on a thumb drive. All my research. Old news articles about Jennifer's disappearance, a list of other girls who left town suddenly. Financial records I found, showing payments from Thorn's development company to Chief Brody's wife. I kept it hidden, taped under my desk drawer. His heart leaped. This was it. This was the proof he needed. Not just Lily's words, but concrete evidence. A pattern of behavior. A clear motive for a cover-up. "Where is it now, Sarah?" Her face crumpled. He took it. When he was searching the house, he found it. I saw him put it in his pocket. The flicker of hope died, replaced by a cold, hard despair. Of course, the henchman was thorough. He hadn't just come to intimidate her, he'd come to erase her. To erase the truth, they were back to square one. It was his word and Lily's diary against a fortress of power and corruption. But as he looked at Sarah, huddled and broken in her kitchen, a new, cold resolve settled over him. Thorne had made a mistake. He had escalated the violence, but he had also escalated the stakes. He had revealed his hand. He was scared. The diary and the secrets Sarah held terrified him. And in that fear, there was a weakness, a pressure. Thorne thought he had retrieved the only copy of Sarah's research. But he was a man of habit, a man of arrogance. He probably hadn't even looked at the files yet, assuming the physical drive was all that mattered. Sarah, he said, his mind racing, a desperate plan beginning to form. Did you ever email any of those files to yourself, as a backup? She looked at him, confused. No, I was too afraid. I only ever kept it on the drive. What about a cloud service? He pressed, Dropbox, Google Drive, anything. She shook her head. No, nothing. It's gone, Mr. Harrison. He has it all. We've lost. He looked at her laptop again, an idea, a wild, improbable gamble, taking shape. Maybe not, he said slowly, walking back into her bedroom. He sat down at her desk, his hands hovering over the keyboard. Maybe he doesn't have everything. Maybe he just has the copy. He opened her web browser. Her email account was still logged in. He went to her sent folder. Nothing. He went to her drafts folder. Empty. And then he saw it. The trash folder. It had one item in it. An email, dated 6 months ago, addressed to an anonymous P.O. box at a private mail facility in the next state. The subject line was a single word, insurance, and attached to it was a single password-protected zip file, named tc_files.zip, single quotes. His breath caught in his throat. Sarah, in a moment of foresight or paranoia, had prepared a dead man's switch. A final, desperate attempt to ensure the truth would survive, even if she didn't. He turned to look at her. She was staring at him, her eyes wide, with a dawning realization. I'd forgotten, she whispered, her voice filled with awe. I sent it to a private investigator, a man I found online who specializes in cold cases. I told him if he didn't hear from me for 6 months, he was to open the file and send it to the state police and every major news outlet in the country. I never heard back from him. I assumed he was a fake. What's the password, Sarah? He asked, his voice trembling with a fragile, dangerous hope. She looked at him, and for the first time since he'd found her, a spark of Lily's fire, a spark of defiance, lit up her tear-filled eyes. She took a deep, shaky breath. Jennifer, she said. The password is her name. He typed the word into the prompt. The file unzipped, revealing a folder filled with documents. Scanned newspaper clippings, PDFs of financial statements, a detailed timeline that linked Marcus Thorne not just to Jennifer Croft's disappearance, but to 2 other girls who had vanished without a trace over the past 2 decades. And there, in a subfolder labeled Audio, was a single file. An MP3. Its name was Confession. What is this? He whispered, his finger hovering over the mouse. It's Lily, Sarah said, her voice barely audible. The night she saw what happened at the mill, she called me from a payphone. She was crying. I told her to record it, to say everything she saw, just in case. She used the little voice recorder I'd given her for her birthday. The next day she gave me the tape. She made me promise to keep it safe, to only use it if something happened to her. I converted it to a digital file years ago. I've never been able to listen to it. His heart stopped. A recording, Lily's voice, from beyond the grave. Her final terrified testimony. This was it. This was the bomb. This was the weapon. That could bring down a king. He looked at Sarah, at the bruises on her face, at the terror and resolve warring in her eyes. They were no longer just a grieving father and a scared teacher. They were the keepers of the truth. And they had a choice to make. They could hide, let Thorne win, and live the rest of their lives in fear. Or they could light the fuse and watch his entire corrupt kingdom burn to the ground. He double-clicked the file, and the voice of his dead daughter, tinny and laced with static and terror, filled the silent room. "My name is Lily Harrison, and I know what Marcus Thorne did." The voice was a ghost, a faint, trembling echo from the past, yet it had the force of a physical blow. Mr. Harrison leaned closer to the laptop, his hands gripping the edge of the desk as if to steady himself against the tidal wave of grief and rage that crashed over him. He could hear the payphone in the background, the distant rumble of a passing truck. The ragged, terrified breaths Lily was taking between words. It was real. It was her. "I saw him at the old mill. I was taking the shortcut home. I shouldn't have been there." Her voice cracked on a sob. "He had a girl in his car, in the trunk. It was Jennifer Croft. I know it was her. He pulled her out. She wasn't fighting. I don't think she was even awake. He hit her, I think. There was blood." Sarah let out a soft, whimpering sound from the kitchen. The sound of a 12-year-old wound being torn open. Mr. Harrison didn't dare look at her. He couldn't look away from the screen, from the progress bar of the audio file, as if by staring at it he could somehow protect the fragile, precious voice of his daughter. "He put her in the boat." Lily's voice continued, a rushed, whispered torrent. "His boat, the fancy one he's always bragging about. He took her out to the middle of the lake. I waited. I hid in the trees for what felt like hours. It was so dark. When he came back, she wasn't with him. He was alone. Oh God, he was alone." The recording dissolved into a series of frantic, choked gasps. The sound of pure, unadulterated terror. "He knows I saw him. I dropped my necklace. The one Dad gave me. The little silver bird. I saw it on the ground when I ran away. He'll find it. He'll know it was me. He's going to come for me. Sarah, you have to believe me. You have to." The recording ended abruptly, cutting off into a sharp click. Followed by the dead hiss of static. Silence descended upon the room again, heavier and more profound than before. It was no longer the silence of absence, but the silence of a tomb. That had just been unsealed. The silver bird necklace. He'd given it to her for her 16th birthday. A small, delicate thing. He remembered the police asking about it. It hadn't been on her when it hadn't been found. Now he knew why. It was at the bottom of a lake, or in a monster's trophy box. It was the proof Thorne had that his secret had a witness. He looked at the files Sarah had collected. They were a devastating mosaic of a predator's life. The financial records were the most damning. A series of large, untraceable cash payments made from a shell corporation owned by Thorne to a consulting firm owned by Police Chief Brody's wife. The payments started the week after Jennifer Croft disappeared. They increased significantly. The month after Lily vanished, it wasn't just a cover-up. It was a conspiracy, bought and paid for. Brody hadn't just been incompetent, he'd been complicit. He'd actively buried the investigation into both girls' disappearances to protect his benefactor. The list of other girls was just as chilling. For other names, spanning 15 years, all of them from the wrong side of the tracks, girls with troubled family lives, girls who were easy to dismiss as runaways. All of them had one thing in common. They had briefly worked at one of Thorne's development properties, or had been seen at one of his lavish parties. They were disposable. Forgotten. Until now. The plot twist wasn't just that Lily had been murdered. It was that her death was just one small part of a much larger, more grotesque machine of power, corruption, and violence. Marcus Thorne wasn't just a killer. He was a serial predator who had used his wealth and influence to turn the entire town into his personal hunting ground, with the very people sworn to protect its citizens acting as his loyal guards. "What do we do?" Sarah's voice was a whisper from the doorway. She had pulled the blanket tighter around herself, but she was standing straighter. The terror in her eyes being replaced by a cold, hard anger. The voice of her friend had given her something her own fear had taken away. Resolve. "He thinks he has the only evidence," Mr. Harrison said, his mind working faster than it had in years. The grief was still there, a hot coal in his chest, but it was now fueling a different kind of fire. "He has the thumb drive. His man took it. Thorne will feel safe. He'll feel untouchable again. That's his weakness. Arrogance." He looked at the date on his phone, It was Thursday. "The annual Thorn Foundation Charity Gala is on Saturday night," he said, the idea blooming in his mind, audacious and terrifying. "The whole town will be there. The mayor, the press, the police, chief, everyone who has ever enabled him, everyone who has ever looked the other way. They'll all be in one room, celebrating his generosity." Sarah's eyes widened as she understood. "You want to play the tape?" "At the gala, I want to do more than that," he said, a grim smile touching his lips. "I want to burn his kingdom to the ground, with him on the throne." The plan was simple and insane. Sarah would go into hiding. He had a cousin who lived 3 states away, a gruff, no-nonsense man who would ask no questions. Sarah would be safe there. While she was gone, he would become the grieving father again, but this time, with a purpose. He would let it be known subtly that he was starting to look into Lily's case again. He would visit the police station, ask to see the old files, knowing Brody would refuse and report straight back to Thorn. He would let himself be seen talking to a retired detective he knew, a good man who had been forced out by Brody years ago. He would plant seeds of doubt, create a sense of unease. He wanted Thorn to be watching him. He wanted Thorn to believe. The only threat was a broken old man on a fool's errand. The next 2 days were a blur of calculated movements. He drove Sarah to the bus station in the dead of night, her face pale but determined in the dim light. "Be careful, David," she'd said, using his first name for the first time. "He's a cornered animal. Cornered animals make mistakes," he'd replied, squeezing her hand. He went to the police station, just as planned. Chief Brody was a caricature of a corrupt cop, all bluster and false sympathy. "David, we went through all this 12 years ago," he'd said, his fleshy face oozing insincerity. "It's a cold case. There's nothing new. You need to let your daughter rest in peace." "I will," Mr. Harrison had said, looking him directly in the eye. "As soon as I find out who put her there." He saw the flicker of panic in Brody's eyes before it was masked by annoyance. The message would be delivered. He spent the rest of the time preparing. He made multiple copies of the audio file and Sarah's research, mailing them to national news outlets with instructions to open them on Sunday morning. He uploaded the files to a dozen different cloud services under anonymous accounts. He made sure the insurance email to the private investigator would be triggered, and he prepared the centerpiece of his plan. The Thorn Foundation Gala was the social event of the year, held in the grand ballroom of the Thorn Plaza Hotel, the crown jewel of Marcus's real estate empire. The room was a sea of tuxedos and evening gowns, champagne flutes, and glittering jewelry. It was a monument to wealth and willful ignorance. Mr. Harrison, dressed in his old, slightly chewed-tight suit, felt like a ghost at the feast. He moved through the crowd, a polite, sad smile fixed on his face, accepting condolences from people who hadn't spoken his name in years. They saw him as a pathetic figure, a relic of a forgotten tragedy. It was the perfect camouflage. He saw Thorn holding court in the center of the room, his arm draped possessively around his wife's frail shoulders. He was laughing, his teeth a predatory flash of white in the soft light. Chief Brody was at his side, his face florid from the free-flowing champagne. They looked comfortable, secure in their power. They had no idea the ground was about to open up beneath their feet. The presentation was scheduled for 9 o'clock. A celebration of the Foundation's work, culminating in a keynote speech from Marcus Thorn himself. The hotel had a state-of-the-art audio-visual system, controlled from a small booth at the back of the ballroom. Mr. Harrison had done his homework. A young, ambitious technician named Leo was running the show. A few days earlier, Mr. Harrison had accidentally bumped into him at a coffee shop. He'd learned that Leo was paying his way through night school, that he despised the arrogance of the wealthy elite he served, and that he had a soft spot for stories of injustice. He had also slipped him a $100 bill and a USB drive. "My daughter made a short film for a school project before she passed away." Mr. Harrison had lied, his voice thick with emotion. "It's all I have left of her creativity. It would mean the world to me if you could just play 30 seconds of it as a tribute during the slideshow." The boy, moved by the old man's grief, had agreed at 5 minutes to 9. Mr. Harrison made his way to the back of the room, his heart a trip hammer in his chest. He saw Leo in the booth, give him a small, sympathetic nod. Everything was in place. He found a spot near the main speakers, his hand in his pocket, clutching a small backup audio player connected to a powerful mini speaker, just in case Leo lost his nerve. There would be no escape. The lights dimmed. The chattering crowd fell. Silent, a slickly produced video began to play on the massive screens that flanked the stage, showcasing the Thorn Foundation's charitable work, smiling children at a new community center, grateful seniors at a funded nursing home. It was a masterpiece of propaganda. Then, the video faded, and the Foundation's logo appeared on screen, a golden T shining like a holy symbol. The slideshow began. Photos of Thorn shaking hands with the governor. Thorn cutting the ribbon on the new library wing. Thorn with his arm around a beaming police chief, Brody, at a police fundraiser. And then it happened. The image of Thorn and Brody froze on the screen. The generic, uplifting music faded into silence. A low hiss filled the ballroom. For a moment, there was just confusion, a few annoyed murmurs from the crowd. Thorn, who was walking towards the stage, stopped, a frown creasing his handsome face. He glanced back at the AV booth, an expression of pure fury forming. And then, Lily's voice filled the room. "My name is Lily Harrison." The sound was clear, pure, and utterly devastating. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. People turned in their seats, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. Mr. Harrison saw Thorn freeze, his face draining of all color. He saw Chief Brody's jaw drop, his champagne flute slipping from his nerveless fingers and shattering on the polished floor. "And I know what Marcus Thorn did." The voice of the dead girl echoed off the crystal chandeliers, a voice from a grave they had all helped to dig with their silence. The recording played on each word a hammer blow against the fortress of lies Thorn had built. The story of the old mill, the name of Jennifer Croft, the boat on the lake. The blood panic erupted. People were shouting, pointing. Thorn's wife let out a thin, piercing shriek and collapsed. Thorn himself seemed paralyzed, his charismatic mask shattered, revealing the raw, ugly face of a cornered predator. He looked wildly around the room, his eyes finally locking on Mr. Harrison, who stood by the speaker, his face a grim mask of righteous fury. The recognition, the understanding of who had orchestrated this, dawned in Thorn's eyes, followed by a look of pure, murderous hatred. He lunged forward, not towards the stage, but towards Mr. Harrison. "You," he screamed, his voice a raw, animalistic roar. "You're dead." But the crowd, his adoring, sycophantic crowd, was no longer on his side. They were a mob now, their faces contorted with horror and disgust. A few men, their faces ashen, moved to intercept him. But before they could reach him, the ballroom doors burst open. State troopers, armed and in full body armor, swarmed into the room, their weapons raised. They were followed by 2 plainclothes detectives. One of them held up a warrant. Marcus Thorn. The detective's voice boomed through the chaos. "You are under arrest for the murders of Jennifer Croft and Lily Harrison." The world seemed to move in slow motion. Thorn stopped dead, his face a mask of disbelief. He looked from the troopers to Brody, a silent, desperate plea in his eyes. But Brody was already being surrounded himself. Chief Howard Brody, the second detective, announced, "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice and accessory to murder." Brody sputtered, his face turning a deep apoplectic purple. "This is a mistake, it's a lie, a fabrication by a crazy old man." But it was too late. The dam had broken. As the troopers slapped handcuffs on Thorn, his eyes, filled with a terrifying, impotent rage, found Mr. Harrison's one last time. There was no remorse in them, no flicker of guilt, only the fury of a king whose crown had been stolen. The camera flashes were like lightning strikes, a frenzy of media capturing the fall of the Titan. The room was a cacophony of sirens, shouting, and sobs. Mr. Harrison stood amidst the chaos, the noise fading into a distant roar. He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was the lead detective. "Mr. Harrison," he said, his voice filled with a quiet respect. "We got the files, the audio, the financial records. And an anonymous tip this morning led us to a storage locker rented by Thorne. We found a collection, trophies. A silver bird necklace was among them." The words hit him with the force of a physical blow. He staggered back, the strength finally leaving his legs. He would have fallen, but the detective caught him. The coal of rage in his chest dissolved, and for the first time in 12 years, the grief, pure and undiluted, was allowed to surface. The tears came, hot and silent, for the little girl who had loved silverbirds, for the brave young woman who had recorded her own eulogy, for the justice that had come 12 years too late, but had come all the same. The king was dethroned. The kingdom was in ruins, and in the deafening silence that followed the storm, a father could finally begin to mourn. The weeks that followed the gala were a blur of headlines, court dates, and revelations. The town of Northwood, once a sleepy emblem of suburban tranquility, became the epicenter of a national media firestorm. Thorne's empire crumbled overnight. The story of his secret life, his predatory reign, was on every news channel, every podcast, every blog. The other victims, the forgotten girls whose disappearances had been so easily dismissed, were finally given a name and a story. Their families, who had lived in a limbo of unanswered questions, found a grim, heartbreaking solidarity with Mr. Harrison. They were a club no one ever wanted to join. The state police divers found them. Just as Lily's diary and Sarah's research had indicated, Jennifer Croft's remains were recovered from the deep, silty bottom of the lake, not far from where Thorne's boat dock had been. And then, a week later, they found another set of remains, and another. The lake, which had been the backdrop for so many happy summer memories, had been his graveyard. 3 more victims, all linked to Thorne, all silenced and submerged. Lily was not among them. The detectives explained, gently, that Thorne had likely disposed of her body elsewhere. Knowing she was a direct witness, a more immediate threat, it was a small, cruel mercy. He would never have a grave to visit, a place to lay flowers. Her only memorial was the truth. Sarah came back to town, no longer a ghost. The fear was gone from her eyes, replaced by a quiet strength. She had testified before the grand jury, her voice clear and steady. Her memory of that terrible night, a vital piece of the prosecution's case. She became a hero, a symbol of quiet courage, but she shied away from the spotlight. She just wanted to teach. She wanted to help other young girls find their voice, to make sure no one else's story was ever silenced. Mr. Harrison found his own quiet purpose. He sold his house, the one filled with too many ghosts, and used the money, along with a significant settlement from the civil suit against Thorne's estate, to start the Lily Foundation. It wasn't for charity galas or gleaming buildings. It was a small, fierce organization dedicated to providing legal aid and investigative resources for the families of missing persons in small towns, for the victims of powerful men who believed they were above the law. He worked from a small, cluttered office, the leather-bound diary always on his desk, not as a source of pain, but as a reminder of his daughter's courage, and his promise to honor it. The trial was a formality. The evidence was overwhelming. Thorne's carefully constructed world had been so completely dismantled that there was nothing left but the ugly truth. He was sentenced to multiple life terms, without the possibility of parole. He would die in prison, a forgotten monster stripped of his power and prestige. Chief Brody, in a desperate attempt to save himself, had confessed everything, his testimony, painting a sickening picture of greed and corruption. He received a lesser, but still significant, sentence. The town had been cleansed by fire. One crisp autumn afternoon, a year after the gala, Mr. Harrison drove out to the old mill. It was cordoned off with police tape, a decaying monument to the evil it had hidden. He walked through the woods, following the path Lily must have taken that day. He stood by the edge of the lake, the water calm and gray under the overcast sky. He wasn't sure why he'd come. He just felt a need to be there, in the place where his daughter's life, and so many others, had been irrevocably changed. He took the small silver bird necklace from his pocket. The police had returned it to him, the last piece of her he would ever hold. He held it in his palm, the metal cool against his skin. He thought of the girl who had worn it, the girl who had fought, in her own way, until the very end. She hadn't been a victim. She had been a warrior. He didn't throw the necklace into the water. He didn't want it to join the other lost things in the deep. Instead, he walked to a large oak tree at the water's edge and hung the necklace on a low-hanging branch. It spun slowly in the breeze, the small silver wings catching the faint light. A marker, a memorial, a silent testament to a life that had mattered, a voice that had, in the end, brought down a king. He turned and walked away, the weight on his shoulders feeling, for the first time in 13 years, just a little bit lighter. The pain would never truly go away. The hole in his life would never be filled. But in its place, something new had been built. A legacy of truth. A foundation of justice. He had a new purpose, a new reason to face the dawn. He had to make sure that no other father ever had to find his daughter's voice in a dusty, forgotten diary. He had to make sure that every Lily, every Jennifer, every forgotten girl was heard. The work was just beginning, and he was ready.